he's asked me to speak. So, not only have you got to put up with me now, Isaac, guess who you're going to put up with between 11 and 12? Ta-da! Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Morgan, if you'll, have you got chapter 28? Have you? Okay, all right. And Isaac, have you got Numbers 28 open? I'm going to have y'all do some readings while I'm asking. Okay. Numbers chapter 28. What does the conversation look like in Numbers 28? Offerings to be observed, continual burnt offering, Sabbath offering, and the Passover. So these are all things that we've covered. Like I said, the book of Leviticus, I think we spent a good bit of time on all this, and so I'm not going to get too back into that and bogged down in that because we got to move on. Numbers 28 provides an extraordinary insight into the practices commanded by God to the Israelites. It underscores the sacredness of time and obedience to God's laws. The dedication required for such a regimented routine of offerings might seem overwhelming, but it can also be seen in the form of discipline that strengthens faith, fosters unity, and brings us closer to the divine. As we read these verses, let us reflect on the ways we can honor and worship God in our own lives and seek His guidance with humility and reverence. You know, when you look at that statement, it kind of echoes how we do today when we assemble on the first day of the week and do our Lord's Supper and we give and all those things that we do to worship God. What were those things designed to do? Designed to help us build our faith, foster unity, and to bring us closer together, doesn't it? So the idea behind what God is doing here is not a foreign idea or foreign concept. That thought was in mind, of course, when the church was in eternity prior to the creation, and so we have it fostered today with us. All right, now. Morgan, will you read verses 1 through 8 for us, please?
Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel and say to them, My offering, my food for my offerings, made by fire, as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time. You shall say to them, This is the offering made by fire, which you shall offer to the Lord, 2 male lambs in their first year, without blemish, day by day, as a regular burnt offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, the other lamb you shall offer in the evening, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil. It is a regular burnt offering which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. And its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb in the holy place. You shall pour out the drink to the Lord as an offering. The other lamb you shall offer in the evening as the morning grain offering, and its drink offering you shall offer it as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord.
Okay, so here we have one of the first offerings here to be observed. And notice what he refers back to. And yes, some of this does go back into the book of Exodus. He refers, as this was done in verse 6 at Mount Sinai. So these practices that they were doing had been going on for quite some time now. And of course, as this new generation comes into being, they need to be reminded, if you will, and maybe somewhat taught the importance of keeping these things just like the older generation had kept. So what we have here, come on now. God instructs Moses to tell the Israelites about the daily burnt offerings. 2 lambs, a year old without defect, were to be offered each one in the morning and one at twilight. These were to be accompanied by a grain offering of fine flour mixed with oil and a drink offering. So this is one of the things they were required. And when we look at a lot of these offerings and things, we see Jesus Christ in this, don't we? We see that He was the Lamb that was slain once and for all. So all these things were absorbed into Him. And really, when you stop and think about it, do we do like a meal offering, if you will, or a bread offering today? It's called the bread, the Lord's Supper, okay? Do we do maybe a drink offering today, if you will? What would that be? The fruit of the vine, wouldn't it? So the idea and principle behind these things here again are still there. Now there were offerings where they offered young bulls. You have to notice I didn't say bullock, but young bulls and things of that nature. That was for specific types of offerings there. So now we have him reminding them about the Sabbath, verses 9 and 10. Isaac, have you got that?
On the Sabbath day, 2 male lambs a year old without blemish, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with oil and its drink offering. This is the burnt offering of every Sabbath, besides the regular burnt offering and its drink offering.
Okay, so here we have about the Sabbath, and he talks here about what is required for that. A lot of offerings involved in this, as we see again, isn't it? So this was a very regimented, and it was a very burdensome process that they had to go through on this. And so we find that on this Sabbath offering, in addition to the daily burnt offering, okay, the Israelites were to offer 2 additional lambs of a year old without defect, along with their respective grain and drink offerings. So this was something that they were required to do. Notice he says, in addition. Okay? I know we've talked about this and made mention of it. It does make you wonder in the Bible. It doesn't tell us about the logistics involved in all this, if you will. You know, how was all this carried out with all these offerings? Well, we know, as we've seen early on in the book of Leviticus, the priesthood began to be structured. You know, you had Moses and Aaron and Eleazar. Then out from under them, you had the different heads of the tribes and the different people that were associated with them. And you also had now a formal priesthood, the Levitical priest offering. I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say there was something like 18,000 helpers out of that 23,000 or something like that, okay? So you begin to see a very structured form of what they were doing here with this. Still, Daniel, it would be interesting to see that actually carried out, wouldn't it? How all this actually played out, you know? Now, Eric, I could be wrong, but I think it's still 24 hours in a day. And we know they did this day and night because it talks about having to keep the fire burning at night and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, it was pretty laborious. It begs a question, why would anybody want to talk about going back to this? You know, one of the things you notice in one form of premillennialism, and I think we covered that a couple of years ago, they have it that the temple's going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem, and sacrificial offerings are going to start taking place again. Greg, why would you do that? You know? It doesn't add up, does it? And then you got your monthly offering, okay? Verses 11 through 15. Bobby, have you got that?
Two bulls from the herd, 1 ram, 7 male lambs a year old without blemish. Also 3/10 of fine flour for a grain offering. Mixed with oil for the 1 ram, and the 10th of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering for every lamb. For a burnt offering, for a burnt offering with a pleasing aroma, a food offering to the Lord. Their drink offering shall be half a hin of wine for a bull, and a third of a hin for a ram, and a quarter of a hin for a lamb. This is the burnt offering of each month throughout the months of the year. Also, 1 male goat for a sin offering to the Lord. It shall be offered besides the regular burnt offering and its drink offering.
Okay, so now you have at the beginning of the month an offering to be done at the beginning of each and every month. Now this is on top of all this other, okay? So here you have this, you know, really, what is this a continual reminder of? that the practices of sin requires death, doesn't it? It requires the shedding of the blood, but it also requires something else of mankind. It requires mankind to do what? It requires some sacrifice, doesn't it? Okay? So on the behalf of Jesus, he made the ultimate sacrifice. Well, today, we have to sacrifice in order to fulfill our responsibility to him, don't we? Okay? So there is a shadow of these things. And it was a continuous reminder. Now, one of the things that we do know is, with all this blood being shed and all these offerings of grain and meal and wine being done, what could it not do? Couldn't take away sin, could it? It took Jesus to take away sin. So we find, as we study Hebrews chapter 8, 9, and 10, if you have time, read that sometimes. It gives you a really good explanation of Jesus absorbing all these things into the cross, okay? Greg?
You just mentioned that this was a reminder.
Right.
Today, we have that reminder on the first day of the week
Come on.
to partake of
That's it. That's it. So, and we see some of the general snippets of the principle involved in the Lord's Supper with the bread and with the wine. And of course, as far as our giving, that comes from the heart. It's not a 10% offering in that thing anymore. And we'll get into that later. But yeah, that's right. That's right. The start of each month requires additional offerings: 2 young bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs of a year old without defect, accompanied by specific grain and drink offerings. There was also the sacrifice of a male goat for atonement. And that atonement there is when one dies, for the other, but it did not take away sin. Now, Christ's blood had the atoning blood to take away sin. So we have to be careful when we take a look at that in a close manner. Verses 16 through 25, Passover and festive of weeks offering. Eric, you got that?
On the 14th day of the first month is the Passover of the Lord, and on the 15th day of this month is the feast. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work. And you shall present an offering made by fire as a burnt offering to the Lord: 2 young bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs in their first year. Be sure they are without blemish. Their grain offering should be a fine flour mixed with oil. 3/10 of an ephah you shall offer for a bull, and 2/10 for a ram. You shall offer 1/10 of an ephah for each of the 7 lambs. Also 1 goat as a sin offering to make atonement for you. You shall offer these besides the burnt offering of the morning, which is for a regular burnt offering. In this manner you shall offer the food of the offering made by fire daily for 7 days, and of a sweet aroma to the Lord. It shall be offered besides the regular burnt offering and its drink offering. And on the 7th day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work.
Okay, so here we have him talking about on the 15th day of this month, so on and so forth, to cover these different offerings. So really what we have here with this, on the 14th day of the first month was the Passover. On the 15th day, the Feast of Unleavened Bread began. Now, generally what you find with this 14th day of the first month, that's not every month. The way their calendar was structured, generally the Passover, we're going to get into the Feast of Trumpets and stuff like that, began their new year, okay? So really what they're doing here is reaffirming what God has already told them to do, aren't they? It's a continuation year after year after year, okay? During which no regular work was to be done for 7 days, and burnt offering was made each day. 50 days after the Passover, the Festival of Weeks began. So what event took place 50 days after the Passover? What was established during the Feast of Weeks? The church, wasn't it? Okay? So here we have that event going on, and we'll get to that in the next chapter. Again, with no regular work, with specific burnt offerings, grain offerings, drink offerings, and goat for a sin offering. So what about an overview on that? Numbers 28 presents an intricate overview of the sacrificial offerings and religious rites commanded by God through Moses to the Israelites. It portrays an intricate divine schedule of daily, weekly, monthly, and annual sacrifices. This chapter underlines the importance of obedience to God's laws and the active participation of the community in worship. So, that last statement really applies heavily to what we do today, doesn't it? Now, we don't do a daily, weekly, and monthly and annual sacrifice per se, but as individual priests in the kingdom of God, do we carry that out in a spiritual form in our lives? Yeah. Our sacrifice to God's made every day, isn't it? That's in our heart, isn't it? Okay? And to live after His word and after His pattern. And so we find that the importance of obedience to God's laws and the active participation of the community in worship. And of course, has a community, if you want to take it into a type form, would be when the church assembles, isn't it? Of course, if we get together during the week and 2 or 3 of us is together and we having a Bible study or something, if I understand that correctly, who's in the midst? Jesus, isn't it? Practical applications from the Bible on this. Any of your brethren got any comments on this so far? I know I kind of blowed through it kind of quick. I just didn't want to get too bogged down in it because we had covered it quite extensively when we went through the latter part of the book of Exodus and, of course, in the book of Leviticus. What are some practical applications? Consistency in worship. Boy, that's a powerful word, being consistent, isn't it? To be consistent means you do it this way each and every time when it's required, don't you? You don't vary, do you? You don't go in and add or take away from something. You have to be consistent in things. Just as the Israelites had daily, weekly, monthly offerings, we should strive for consistency in our worship and devotion to God. Gratitude and remembrance. Regularly reflect on God's provisions and deliverance in your life using special occasions to express gratitude. Now, we had talked about a little bit about, just touched on fasting a little bit, don't see where it's really a law, but we do have in the Bible examples of where that went on. Would that be a way that if we chose to fast maybe from 8 to 12 in the morning, go without food and drink and study and meditate on God's Word, would we have presented to God in our life a special occasion where we remember Him? Yeah, and it could be other things too that we set aside for. Maybe from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the evening, we're going to say, hey, I'm going to make some phone calls to people I know and see if I can get them to services. Would that be a special occasion that we've set aside? Yeah, to give God the glory? Yeah. Holiness in worship. Approach worship with reverence and a heart that seeks to honor God's holiness, recognizing the significance of offering our best to Him. And that's the real key, isn't it? We're to do our best. We all have different abilities. We all have different talents. We all have different things that we can do. God has not overburdened us. Well, you got to be just like somebody else. We take what we have and we do the best with it. Okay. And that's what God requires of us today. Okay, that's the end of chapter 28. I'm going to have to step back in the computer room for a second and move my slides over to chapter 29 on this one. So it'll take me just a second to do that. I think that's the end of it. So I'll be back in just a minute. It won't take but a second. we're gonna be in Numbers chapter 29, and probably won't get into 30, because like I said, I may quit just a little bit before we normally do, get ready for the worship and kind of give my voice a little bit of a break. So, here we have, well, Greg, I can do things like this now because I'm at that age bracket. You know, I'm subject to, lay this down in here and never find it. Okay. Psalm 103, 15 through 16. The life of mortals is like grass. They flourish like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, it is gone, and its place is remembered no more. You know, when you stop and think about that, Peggy and I have been talking, it just amazes us. Where did the 60 years go? It's almost like it was a blur, okay? You think, wow, 1965 was just yesterday, Jeff, And here it is, 2025. So, that's a very true statement, isn't it, about that, so kind of interesting. Conversation, Numbers chapter 29. Just going to kind of cover this. I've got a one-line bullet here. Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And so here again, those are things that we talked about when we went through other chapters in great detail. So he's just rehearsing it again to them as a reminder. Celebrating the Feast of Trumpets. Verses 1 through 6. Greg, if you got that. 29.
Then on the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall also have a holy convocation. You shall do no laborer's work. It will be to you a day of blowing trumpets. You shall offer a burnt offering as a soothing aroma to the Lord. 1 bull, 1 ram, and 7 male lambs, 1 year old without defect. Also a grain offering, fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for the bull, 2/10 for the ram, and 1/10 for each of the 7 lambs. Offer 1 male goat for a sin offering to make atonement for you. Besides the burnt offering of the new moon and its grain offering, and the continual burnt offering and its grain offering, and their drink offerings according to their ordinance for a soothing aroma, and offering of fire to the Lord.
Okay, so here we have the first day of the month shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no servitude work. We're getting into now a part of that which is attached to the law of the Feast of Trumpets. And if we remember what this is about, this chapter begins with the Lord commanding Moses about the Feast of Trumpets to be held on the first day of the 7th month, of this. This holy convocation involves a burnt offering, 1 young bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, all without defect, along with the associated grain offering, drink offerings. This is in addition to the daily offering and its corresponding offerings. Oh, I've got a question. Why is it called the Feast of Trumpets? So I thought I'd kind of step back and take a look at that. The Feast of Trumpets marked the beginning of 10 days of consecration and repentance before the Lord. It was one of the 7 Jewish feasts or festivals appointed by the Lord, and one of the 3 feasts that occurred in the autumn. The Feast of Trumpets began on the first day at the new moon of the 7th month. The name comes from the command to blow trumpets in Leviticus 23:24, Numbers 29, 1 through 6. Commonly today we know of it as Rosh Hanukkah, which means head of the year, because it marks the beginning, and I was wrong, I said that other one did, but I was ahead of myself. It marks the beginning of the Jewish civil calendar. That's what I was trying to get at a while ago, The Jewish civil calendar begins. No kind of work was to be performed. Also, burnt offerings and sin offering was to be brought before the Lord. So that's what the Feast of Trumpets is about. In the Leviticus passage, the word trumpet blast, or a translation of the Hebrew word teruah, which means a shout or blowing. It appears that the shofar, or the ram's horn, was to be blown at this time, as it was on the other new moons, Psalms 81:3. Jewish tradition indicates that both the ram's horn and the priestly silver horn were used in the Feast of Trumpets. So you can find other references to it, like in the Psalm of David. The Feast of Trumpet was important for several reasons. First, it commemorated the end of the agricultural and festival year. Also, the Day of Atonement fell on the 10th day of this month, and the Festival of Booths began on the 15th day. The blowing of the trumpet on the first day of the month heralded a solemn time of preparation for the Day of Atonement. This preparation was called 10 Days of Repentance, or the Day of Awe. The trumpet sound was an alarm of sorts and can be understood as a call to introspective and repentance. So this is what that Feast of Trumpets is all about. And I put all that in there, and everything as a reminder. The Daily Atonement, verses 7 through 11. Daniel, you got that?
On the 10th day of this 7th month, you shall have a holy convocation. You shall afflict your souls. You shall not do any work. You shall present a burnt offering to the Lord as a sweet aroma, 1 young bull, 1 ram, and 7 lambs in their first year. Be sure they are without blemish. Their grain offering shall be of fine flour mixed with oil, 3/10 of an ephah for the bull, 2/10 for the 1 ram, and 1/10 for each of the 7 lambs. Also 1 kid of the goats as a sin offering. Besides the sin offering for atonement, a regular burnt offering with its grain offering and their drink offerings.
Okay. Let me hit this thing here. The Lord then details the observance for the Day of Atonement on the 10th day of the 7th month, a day of rest and self-denial. The Israelites are required to present a burnt offering consisting of 1 young bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, and all without defect, along with the associated grain offering and drink offerings. This offering is apart from the sin offering and regularly daily burnt offering. So here again, here's another series of offerings that are going on over and above the normal offerings at the 7th day of the civil calendar. What's the Day of Atonement? The Day of Atonement, also known as Yom Kippur, that's what we hear about today when they celebrate Yom Kippur, was the most solemn holy day of all the Israelites' feasts and festives, occurring once a year on the 10th day of Tishri, the 7th month of the Hebrew calendar. On that day, the high priest was to perform elaborate rituals to atone for the sins of the people. Described in Leviticus 16, the atonement ritual began with Aaron, or subsequent high priest of Israel, coming into the Holy of Holies. The solemnity of the day was underscored by God telling Moses to warn Aaron not to come into the holy place whenever he felt like it. He could only come on the special day once a year, lest he die. God had a particular restriction about coming to the most holy of holies, didn't he? There was a specific time when you came, you were not to enter the most holy of holies at any other time, or at least you die. So he had a strict prohibition about the way the Holy of Holies was to be handled. This was not a ceremony to be taken lightly, and the people were to understand that atonement for sin was to be done in God's way. Boy, really, this whole thing has a very powerful teaching in it about do we do it just whenever we want? You know, you kind of see that in the religious world. I know, a lot of times there are those that meet on Saturday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And the reasoning behind it, well, it's close enough to the first day of the week. Okay? Then you get into some that will do that practice, talking about the Jewish calendar versus the Roman calendar and all this kind of stuff. But God has given us specific instructions about how we to enter Hatton on the first day of the week, isn't it? Now, one thing he didn't tell us, Daniel, is 1 o'clock in the morning on the first day of the week or 6 o'clock in the evening on the first day of the week. He just said first day of the week, didn't he? Okay, so he does have a specific restriction. You know, we have, and I've been to services in the Catholic Church at funerals, and they offer the Lord's Supper. Only if you're practicing Catholic. I thought that was real interesting. You go to a funeral there on Thursday or Tuesday or whatever, they offer the Lord's Supper to practicing Catholics only. If you're non-practicing Catholic or you're outside the Catholic Church, they won't give it to you. So that's doing it the way you want to do it, isn't it? Okay? God has given us specific instructions on how he wants us carried out, doesn't he? He gave them specific instructions on how to prepare the meal, didn't he? Or the flour. He gave them specific instructions, and he didn't do it too much here, but when we go back into Leviticus, about the purity and clarity of the wine, didn't he? Okay? So God has given us these instructions to do these things. The Feast of Tabernacles, verses 12 through 34. Reed, you got that?
12-34?
Yeah. Well, I may stop you halfway or something. Okay.
Then on the 15th day of the 7th month, you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work. You shall observe the feast of the Lord for 7 days. You shall present a burnt offering, an offering by fire as a soothing aroma to the Lord, 13 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old, which are without defect, and their grain offering, fine flour mixed with oil, 3 tenths of an ephah for each of the 13 bulls, 2 tenths for each of the 2 rams, and a tenth for each of the 14 lambs, and 1 male goat for a sin offering, besides the continual burnt offering, its grain offering, and its drink offering. And on the second day, 12 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without defect, and their grain offering and their drink offerings for the bulls, for the rams and for the lambs, by their number according to the ordinance. And 1 male goat for a sin offering, besides the continual burnt offering, and its grain offering, and their drink offerings. And on the third day, 11 bulls, 2 rams, 14 male lambs, 1 year old without defect, and their grain offering, and their drink offerings for the bulls, for the rams and for the lambs, by their number according to the ordinance. And 1 male goat for a sin offering, besides the continual burnt offering, and its grain offering, and its drink offering.
Okay, I'll take it from there. On the 4th day, 10 bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year without blemish, their meat offering, their drink offerings for the bullocks, for the rams, for rams and the lambs shall be according to their number after the manner. And 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, besides the continual burnt offering, his meat offering, and his drink offering. And on the 5th day, 9 bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year without spot. And their meat offerings and their drink offerings for the bullock, for the rams, for the lambs shall be according to their number after the manner. And 1 goat for sin offering, besides the continual burnt offerings and drink offerings. Now on the 6th day, so each day had its own particular offering pattern, didn't it? 8 bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year without blemish, and their meat offering, their drink offerings for the bullocks, for the rams, for the lambs shall be according to the number after that manner. And 1 goat for a sin offering, besides a continual burnt offering, the meat offering and drink offering. And on the 7th day, 7 bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year without blemish, and their meat offering and their drink offering for the bullocks, for the rams, for their lambs, shall be according to their number after the manner, and 1 goat for a sin offering, besides a continual burnt offering, his meat offering, and his drink offering. So there was a whole lot of offerings, and I thought I was going to quit early, but I don't look like I am. There was a whole lot of offerings going on during this Feast of Tabernacles on a daily basis. The Feast of Tabernacles, and I'm just going to do it like this, 12 through 34. Let's see, Jeff, I left off on 35. Would you read 35 through 40, please?
On the eighth day.
Gotta finish
you
this
shall
up.
have a solemn assembly, and you shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall offer a burnt offering, a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, a year old without blemish. Grain offering and the drink offerings for the bull, and for the ram and the lambs in the prescribed quantities. Also 1 male goat for a sin offering, besides regular burnt offerings and grain offerings and drink offerings. These you shall offer to the Lord at the appointed feast, in addition to your vow offerings and your freewill offerings and your burnt offerings and your grain offerings and your drink offerings, and for your peace offerings. So Moses told the people of Israel, just as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Okay, so these were commandments of the Lord to do in this manner each day of the Feast of Tabernacles. The rest of the chapter provides a regulation for the Feast of Tabernacles, a 7-day event starting on the 15th day of the 7th month. For each day of the festival, specific number of bulls, rams are to be sacrificed, with the quantity of bulls decreasing each day. Grain offering, drink offering, and a male goat for sin offering are also stipulated for each day. If you notice, it talked about the 8th day in verses 35 through 40. So what is significant about that? Finally, the Lord instructs Moses about an additional solemn assembly to be held on the 8th day after the Feast of Tabernacles. This assembly involves a specific burnt offering of 1 bull, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and a male goat for sin offering, along with their accompanying grain offerings and drink offerings. The number 8 is associated with salvation and a new beginning. Salvation and a new beginning is what that was about, to finalize that Feast of the Tabernacles. And I may not have time to go through this, but we'll see. Don't you go bad on me, Bagger. Teaching points. Daily offerings. Numbers 28, 3 through 4 describes the daily offerings. I shouldn't use that font. Emphasizing the need for continual worship. This is the offering made by fire that you are to present to the Lord. 2 unblemished year-old male lambs each day has a regular burnt offering. In Numbers 28, 9 through 10, the Sabbath offerings are outlined, highlighting the special significance of the Sabbath as a day set apart for the Lord. On the Sabbath day, present 2 unblemished year-old male lambs, along with 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering and its drink offering. Monthly offerings. Numbers 28, 11 through 15 details the offerings at the beginning of each month, reminding us of the importance of taking time with worship. So for the first day of each month, you are to present to the Lord a burnt offering of 2 young bulls and 1 ram. Verses 16 through 25 describes the offering during the Passover and of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, pointing to the significance of remembering God's deliverance. On the 14th day of the first month, you are to celebrate the Lord's Passover. I'm just going to go on through this. We've done covered it, because I'm going to have to stop and ring the buzzer and get ready for the worship service. So we'll do that. I appreciate it. I know we blew through that kind of quick. We had went through it in great detail when we covered it in the last part of Exodus and Numbers. And I just didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on going back to the ins and outs of it. But that's God's instructions to this new generation. They're to keep His word and they're to keep His commandments on these things. So we'll get ready for the worship service.